Welcome to the virtual presentation for Module 5, Preparing a Quality Lesson. This is our virtual presentation to make up for our inclement weather day. Make sure you watch this whole presentation through. The video should play on each slide. You can pause anywhere you need to take notes or to complete any activities within the instruction. Today we'll work on Introduction to Organization and Instruction as well as equipment. So make sure you've read the textbook, Introduction to Teaching Physical Education Principles and Strategies, Chapter 8. So we'll dive into Chapter 8, Lesson Planning. So here's some reminders before we get going on today's lesson. Check your assignment feedback. It's really important to look closely at the assignment feedback as we're in Module 5 and then Module 6, 7, and 8 as we build our lesson plan, because I'll give you feedback and you need to carry that on into different things. So start with your 3-part performance objective. Many people on the task, about half of you had it really well, and some of you didn't use that actionable language. The student will execute, the participant will perform, and then your skill. And then it needs to be about that simple, but your skill needs to be your specific skill. And then the condition. Remember, the condition is the activity, just the activity that we'll use for the final assessment. And then the criteria needs to be specific and measurable, but it also needs to be realistic for our beginning first day performers in like a secondary age group. So look at your 3-part performance objective feedback really closely. Make any updates. Some students I gave some specific verbiage to change if they were close. Other people I gave you some concepts to consider, and then carry that on to your lesson planning worksheet and possibly your lesson plan. Next is your essential questions. On the essential questions, some of us made it a little too specific. Remember, neither essential question can have our lesson topic in the essential question, and some of you did that. So make sure you go back and look at it. Our first essential question needs to be tied to our bigger picture sport or activity. So we can't say a basketball chess pass, we can say basketball or offensive strategies in basketball. And our second essential question, remember, needs to be tied to the unit. So it would then be asking more about team sports, or we could talk about fitness activities. And they need to be questions that are open-ended that can have a lot of different answers. We will not have class on any observation day. Our first scheduled one is Thursday, February 20th. And even though we had inclement weather today, we will still have our observation day since we did our virtual lecture. So there's no class meeting this Thursday. But make sure you stay up with all of your assignments and your assignment feedback. And most of you need to really get on these observations. Make sure you're getting them scheduled and getting caught back up on getting some of those done and doing your worksheets. Here's a list of all the Module 5 objectives. We'll focus in on the 2 that are highlighted in yellow. We want to analyze, classify, discuss, and consider the distribution, collection, and storage methods, as well as develop safety instructions for equipment. And the second one we'll focus on today will be to investigate, explain, discuss, simulate, and even apply various instructional tasks to our specific lesson. So those are the 2 objectives, our learning objectives for today. So what are we going to get into today? Here's today's big ideas. First of all, we'll talk about organization and instruction. We'll introduce you to some of those different concepts and what that means. And those are a lot of things that are kind of integrated within how you teach and provide instruction. They might not actually be right. Some of the organization you might not list on the lesson plan, but it's important to know. The next thing is we'll discuss how to write the curriculum information. All the students will write the NASB standards. You should have that NASB standards document in your portfolio. If not, you can get on Canvas. And on Canvas, on the Module 5 documents, the NASB standards document is listed. When you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it has additional documents. The PE teachers will also fill in the grade level expectations as well as the Show Me standards aligned with their instructional activity. Those documents or links to the documents are also located on the Module 5 document page right by the NASB standards. We'll also talk about equipment, distribution and collection of equipment, as well as explaining how to safely use it. We'll get into our instructional introduction, which will continue with our set induction, which is how you kind of generate that excitement. And then we'll talk about how we just break down our 4 phases of movement and we start introducing those to our participants in our demonstration and explanation portion of the lesson. And then the content development really focuses in then on your 4 phases of movement. How are you going to provide instruction or break down those skills of your phases of movement? And then we'll introduce what teaching cues are today, because those are the things you say in your instruction to help people improve or understand those different breakdown portions of your skill or activity. Next, we'll start with our introduction to organization and instruction. So let's really get going today. So as we go through these, think about each one a little bit. Maybe think about how it could relate to your lesson or how it could relate to instruction in either a physical education class, a community-based recreation program, or a community-based like health and fitness type program. But remember, we're going to kind of go through the gamut here and go through a little bit of a sequence. So let's talk about organization, management, and then instruction. So how do you organize, manage, and teach or provide instruction to a group of 20, which would be a smaller class, first graders? Remember, first graders are probably 6 or 7-year-olds. So you can pause this and think about it. Think about how it could relate to your specific lesson you're going to teach, as well as more global. So the organization would be, you'd have to be really organized. You have to, prepare your lesson, prepare for your specific learners, break down your skill into the basics, because you'll probably be teaching it to some people for the first time. And when you organize that, you're going to have to try to organize it with some kind of good sequence and flow and small pieces that include some fun. Your management, you're going to have to set your routines and then how you align different students. So when they come in, when they're in an activity, are they in specific spots? Are there spots on the floor? Are there dots on the floor? Are there areas they go? And then how are you going to manage them within activities? How are you going to group participants? When they're that old, it's sort of like herding cats. They're going to be all over the place. So you're going to have to be kind of firm in your management and just get them to areas and then teach them the basics. Your instruction, how do you break down your instruction? So at that age group, you're going to have to start with the basic skills and really focus in on performance, which is the form, not necessarily always results. All right. So you're going to want to teach the basics. You're going to want to teach them in small chunks, and you're probably going to want to start with either the stance or the simplest part of the movement. Next, how does this change when you move up in sequence to some middle schoolers? And these might be, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. So how do you provide organization, management, and instruction or teach a group of 20 middle schoolers? Well, here's some things that change. First of all, organization is going to be similar. You're going to have to be really prepared. But now we're going to move into not only performance, but we're going to start considering results at this level. So we're going to have to consider, how do we improve performance? So when we organize things, middle schoolers, they get in maybe a rebellious phase. So we're going to have to, half of the class is going to really still love PE and love your activity, and half of the class is going to be like, why, and kind of maybe buck the trend or not want to do things. So you're going to have to consider that in your organization and management strategies. Your management's going to have to be firm. You're going to have to organize things to include fun and try to diversify your activities to get a wider range of interest. And then when you're providing instruction, the same thing. You're going to have a wider, more varying skill level. So you're going to have to teach both beginners as well as provide instruction to people that already maybe have the skill and are becoming competent performers. So we'll be able to add some more instructions, some more complex instructions, maybe some more steps. We'll even put on some things like more how to apply skills. And then we really want to start talking about how you could apply these skills outside of the gym or our activity. Consider next, what changes occur when you move up to a big classroom of 35 to 40 high school kids in physical education. You can pause and consider this for a minute. So the changes that could happen would be, your organization. You're for sure, if you haven't before, going to in middle school, you might have transitioned to using a locker room and changing clothes. Your organization is going to need to include that. You're going to take roll. You're also in your organization and management. If it didn't start occurring in middle school, it's definitely going to happen in high school. You're going to have to provide different feedback, different assessments. You're going to have to keep results because grades are going to become part of the equation either in middle school or high school, depending on where you're at. So you're going to have to, record different data. Your management's going to have to be firm. Kids could get dangerous if they get out of control with some equipment. You're going to want to set your routines. But here you might even, have a syllabus where people sign off on it and they understand things. People generally at this level understand things. You just have to provide that instruction. So in your teaching, you're going to be able to start with the basics of the performance and then move on to improving performance to improve results. So your instruction is going to focus on that and have a different kind of scope and sequence. You're going to want to tie things to real life, but you're also going to want to provide students possibly with the opportunity to set their own goals or have some performance goals or to provide some instruction to help improve over time. So then think about it. I focused in a little bit on a PE class, but if we were going to be on an athletic team practice, how would that be different than if we were in a classroom? Well, there's a variety of ways. First of all, it's going to be before or after the school hours. You never know about transportation with parents, about attendance. Some teams, the participants want to be there, so there's some motivation. Some they don't. Depends on your level. A lot of times, athletic teams get a little more competitive. They get a little more focused on results, especially as that grade level and age level increases. There'll be people that after a while, after a practice sessions go on and you're in the season, if you're at a varsity type level, there's going to be your people that play and your people that kind of don't play as much. And how's that motivation going to come into effect then? You're going to have team rules. There's going to be, more consequences or punishment type of thing. You're going to be preparing for competition, so results can become a focus of an athletic team. So there's all kinds of different things we would consider in organization and instruction. So we considered kind of the global things. Let's get a little bit more specific. As a teacher or coach, you're going to have to think about these things when you're conceptualizing or planning your organization and then moving into planning your instruction. So how do you get your participants' attention? All right, that's a big thing. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to use a whistle? Are you going to use your voice? You're going to clap? You're going to turn music on or off? It kind of depends on your scenario, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. So let me help frame this. That was, an introduction here, but class organizational tasks, they don't always bleed into the instruction, but they are important to the teaching and learning process because they set the foundation or framework for instruction. Although getting their attention isn't necessarily teaching them, if you don't have a good solid way to do that, the instruction, you're going to have wasted time, you're going to have more transitions, waiting for students to pay attention, so you're going to take away from the instruction time. So we don't want to take away from student learning, so it's important to build good organizational routines. So these tasks need to be done quickly and efficiently, and we need to develop a normal routine, and then we'll have some procedures to go along with that. So how do you organize your lessons or practices? A good sequence, if you look at our lesson plan, you're going to start out by getting their attention. All right. Somewhere you're going to have a warm up. You're going to want to get their heart rate up. You're going to want to do a warm up, kind of a general warm up, and then maybe a specific warm up for your activity. How are you then going to explain and demonstrate the skill or activity you're going to teach that day? All right. You're going to have to, like I said, build some excitement, get people interested, maybe connect it to previous learning. Then you're going to move in through the closed practice to open practice by adding in variables. Closed practice means we're going to work on a skill with no variables. So we might just work on the form of something with, no offense, no defense. We might be hitting off of a tee, so it's not even considering different pitches coming at us. And then we'll move into open variable practice where there's different variables. Now, it might be a different pitch coming at us. The sun might be in our eyes. The pass isn't right at us. We have to catch it. Their defense might be there. So there's all kinds of different, we build these different activities in a sequence um, to help people learn the basic parts and then move to applying them. So then we'll add in things like extensions, and we'll talk about extensions later. Those are things that add complexity to the task to help us apply them better, to maybe consider results. And then we really do consider results in the assessment portion. We're going to assess throughout the whole time. We're going to do formative assessment during all of our closed and open practice sessions. And formative means we're still forming the skill. We're giving them feedback. A lot of times formative assessment isn't necessarily always scored. But our summative assessment is the one at the end of the lesson. So it's the end of our day, our activity, to see if people were actually able to meet our performance objective, which is our goal. And then we'll have our lesson closure where we tie things together, tie things possibly back to the essential questions. So what teaching or coaching style will you use? We'll dig into this later in a later lesson, but you're going to probably start out with the direct or control style, where you control everything that goes on. You're directing the learning. You're going to tell people, we're working on this, do this first, throw the ball back and forth, work on the skill. You're going to really be, a coach-led, directed style. And then you're going to move to loosen control a little bit and let your participants or students try different activities, and you're going to step back and be more of a moderator, a facilitator, which is going to be your indirect styles. And you're going to continue to always, coach up, teach safety, but you're going to continue to provide coaching pointers and feedback to improve performance. So we'll talk about teaching and coaching styles in a lesson later in Module 5. The next thing is we have visual learners, auditory learners, read-write learners, kinesthetic learners. So our explanation, everybody needs to hear how to do it, but it focuses in on our auditory learners. And our demonstration helps people visualize it. They get to see it, so it helps our visual learners. But whatever skill or activity we're going to do, we want to try to explain and possibly demonstrate. Sometimes those go together. We explain it while we're demonstrating it, but we need to break down how we're going to do those two things to kind of kick off the lesson. And then the kinesthetics is when we start building their activities because they're doing it. All right. So that's next. How are you going to structure your sequence of activities to promote the skill development, to let the kinesthetic hands-on learners do things? And then we can focus that on improvement. All right. So like that structure and sequence, like that goes kind of to our organization too. Like, is it our instruction, demonstration, explanation? How is the closed practice variable moved to open practice variable? What extensions are we going to add? So all of those different things, how are we going to continue? Are we going to start with, if we break down our skill into the 4 parts, are we going to teach the stance first because it comes first, or are we going to teach the easiest part first? So when we talk about non-instructional tasks, like I said, one of the big things is stop signals or any type of signals. A lot of people use a device such as a whistle. Sometimes you'll hear music get turned on and off in an activity or a gym, or even in a practice session when you're doing your warm-up. People use different things, drums and bells. Depends on really your activity, possibly the size and loudness of your facility and if sound carries. The next thing is a lot of people use their voice. They might use a microphone. There's clip-on mics now. There's everybody's got some kind of extra external speaker that you can use in your gym. Gyms and outdoor facilities a lot of times have wireless mics and PAs. Those are great to use. But when you use your voice, you're going to teach specific commands like huddle up or stop or freeze. And what does that really mean? Like if I said freeze, I wanted them to stop, like try to stop their body exactly where it was, because I might want to teach them, your elbows here, or your non-dominant foot's here, or if you were in a team setting, like you're out of positioning for offense or defense. And stop was kind of a little bit something different. It's kind of like stop and turn around and pay attention. Huddle up was everybody was kind of coming in, getting around a semicircle so we could talk about things. Balls on the rack or equipment up was like you did that and then you came back to a specific spot. You never want to leave things out that, putting your equipment up is important. You don't want people to get injured. You might also use prompts. Some teachers like to put the hand in the air, and then people got to pay attention. Then everybody gets quiet, or they might clap where, the teacher or coach claps, the team claps twice, teacher claps twice, they clap twice, whatever the case. So a lot of times you might use prompts like that. So how are you going to provide signals? Another important part is teacher positioning. You want to stay in front of the group as much as you can and try to stay out of the middle as much as you can. All right, you have to remember you have a legal duty to effectively supervise, and if you can't see and hear people, you can't effectively supervise. That's at least what the courts say. So whether you're a coach or a teacher, you have that legal duty to effectively supervise. All right, so if you're not in front of the group and you step in and provide instruction to one person or a small group, you still have to use your peripheral vision to see everybody. You probably need to continue to move your positioning, like moving around, so you can try to get your back closer to the wall so you can see everybody. Can everyone see you? Can you see everyone? If you can't see everyone, they can't see you. If they can't see you, you're probably not supervising them. So I remember learning a thing back in my PE training. If your back is to the wall, the teacher sees all. If the back is to the middle of the classroom, students fiddle. I know that's not a word that's used a whole lot anymore, but if your back's to the wall, you can see all. Now that, like I said, don't let that stop you from moving around and giving instruction. But when you step in and you can't see people after a while, like that needs to be momentary so you can get back and make sure you're still observing everybody. So here are some class formations to help you out. Seeing everybody. Start off with the one on the top middle, squads. That's kind of your normal thing. People come out, they get on lines, they get on spots, they get on dots, whatever you have. You might put them in. I like to always put like a line captain in the front, and then every week I switch. That person went to the back, the next person came to the front, they were the line captain. They turned around, and when we did exercises and counted, and they told me who was missing out of their group. And then sometimes when I had them pick different teams for different things, their teams would be their squads. Uh, if you're providing some instruction, if people are in a straight line, they can't always see you. So I would tell them to scatter, and they would just kind of step to the left, step to the right of their line so everybody could see. And that would be your one off to the left top, your scattered squads. You might have a split squads where you kind of have a gap in the middle and you can walk back and forth and provide instruction. But if you do, you kind of want to hustle when you're in that middle section and get to the other end and turn around. If you don't move people, like I said, like I did, to the front, and you always have people in the back, like they lose out on the instruction. So you need to kind of consider this and turn your instruction around and make the other end your front once in a while. You might have one line, baseline, sideline, in an area while you're providing instruction. You might have split lines where two different groups can see from side angles, or you might even have a semicircle. Just really depends on what works best for your specific activity. If you see here, though, the T is the teacher. When you do this, you're going to do it on your lesson plan. You're going to provide two diagrams. You're going to make some formations for your activities. You can put a T for teacher, C for coach, but you'll make a little legend like a map has. You might even have like, this is what a cone looks like, or this is what a ball looks like, or a goal, and then, this is students in line, these are students, whatever the case. So make sure you come back and look at this section for formations to help you with those two diagrams. So we're going to do a quick activity, and you need to like kind of think through this when we're doing it. Think about, you're getting ready to teach your specific lesson that you're working on, and you're the teacher or coach. You just completed giving the instructional part of the demonstration and explanation, and you're getting ready to do your first activity where you're going to have them try the stance or some basic part of it, the first basic part. So you want them to divide them into groups. They're not going to do it individually. They say they need a partner. All right. So that might not fit your skill, but if it does, use your skill. If not, just think about if you were putting them into groups where they got into groups to do this. All right. So they're going to move into the active part of the first drill from just being in like squad lines. So write down 3 ideas or methods of how you could quickly put participants into groups. All right, so Hopefully you came up with a couple of ideas, but here's some different ways. First of all, you could have your pre-assigned groups. These could be your regular groups. So you have people in squad lines, you have them in teams. They might have 3 or 4 people, right? So you might do that and just have regular groups. You might have skill groups. So think about, like, now maybe you're in a team setting. You have your track and field. You're going to put your throwers one area, your jumpers one area, your distance runners one area, your sprinters one area, maybe your hurdlers an area. Or you might consider it like with baseball or softball. Your pitchers are going to do one thing. A lot of times the pitchers and catchers are together. Your infielders are going to do something else. Your outfielders are going to do something else. You might split them into teams. You might have teams for your segment in a PE class, or even in an athletic practice, you might have your first and second team. You might split teams evenly. You might mix up your teams each week. Another thing is your student choice. You can just tell them, get a partner, get into groups of 2 or 3. That way, if there's an odd person, all right? Or it depends on what it is. You might need 4. So say you're playing doubles pickleball. You might say, get into groups of 4. All right, so instructing students to get into these groups allows them, to pick their own partners. Sometimes they like to do things with their partners. It's motivating. They communicate better. A lot of times they get to people with the same, a similar skill level too. You might have people count off, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I did that, I generally put them in a line and I would point to them and they'd give me, I'm going to 3. So what's your number? 1? And they'd have to say it, and I would help them remember it. And a lot of times I'd be like, all right, 1s are going here. And then as soon as they got their number, they went to the spot, because especially in elementary, the students forget their number by the time you get done numbering off. But you can count off. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, or students jockey for position, or students forget their numbers. So it can be a quick method sometimes, but then again, it can take some time sometimes. You might have team captains. The team captains could pick teams for the day. They could pick teams for an activity. They could pick teams for maybe a unit. This tends to take a little bit longer. There could be a little bit of favoritism, but then again, it builds some leadership skills, and you can, allow people to choose some things once in a while. You might just use objects. You might hand out, walk around and look at them and try to even out teams on yourself and hand them a red or a blue penny. You're on the red team, you're on the blue team, you're on the green team. You might have them pick a card, and whatever card they pick tells them what team they're on, and they go to a specific area, or maybe what activity they go to. You might have random characteristics. If you got a red shirt on, a blue shirt on, go here, go there. If you got brown hair, go over here. If you got blonde hair, go over there. And then when you get down to people that don't, you just kind of split them up evenly. And then the last thing, you could post your groups or teams possibly in your locker room door. I like to do this a lot of times when I was an athletic coach and I was mixing up my teams. Here's your shooting groups for the day, here's your teams for the day, and then they would know which side of their reversible jersey to come out on. But you might just even post groups or teams and have it kind of pre-selected. So that goes kind of back to your pre-assigned groups a little bit. But if you do that, it takes that organizational time out of your lesson, and it gives you more time for your lesson or practice. So look on your lesson plan or your lesson planning documents. Hopefully you have those with you, because we're going to work on our lesson plan some today. And if not, you can pull them up offline or put the stuff in later. So all students, whether you're a wellness major or a P major, are going to fill out the curriculum information section with the NASP standards. So you're going to start by listing your primary NASP standard. For this specific lesson, everybody's primary NASP standard is NASP standard number 1. So you need to put NASP standard number 1. You need to write a short statement what that means to you, and then you need to write a short statement on how that aligns specifically with your lesson concept. So everybody will be NASP standard number 1. When we do our video, nobody will be 1, everybody will be on something else. Your next part of this is explain all of the secondary NASP standards that apply. And you'll do the same thing. You'll write the standard number, you'll write a short sentence or phrase explaining what that standard is, and then you'll explain how that standard in a short sentence is aligned with your lesson concept. So, for example, if you're doing a fitness type activity, it would relate to NASP standard number 3. If you don't remember what all that is, go look it up. If you're doing a skill that you then apply in an applied setting, it would be NASB standard number 2. You could apply it in a game or tactics or strategies. So you need to consider all the different ones that it could be and list those out. It's probably not going to be all of them, but it'll be at least probably 1 to 3 more secondary standards. So all students will do this section, and you should consider that and do it well. Remember, everybody's NASB standard number 1 is the primary standard. So only the physical education teachers will do this. And these 2 documents that you're going to use are also in the Module 5 documents page, like the NASB standards document is, even though you should have that in your portfolio. But these are listed under GLE's, grade level expectations, and show me standards. So most of you know how to write this. A couple of you might not. I've had it in other classes. But you'll start with the GLEs. You'll figure out, you'll go into the secondary, you'll go into the grade level expectations document, and you'll scroll down to middle school to high school, whatever grade level you're teaching this to. And then you'll find your specific skill, because it's going to be listed in there. You're going to have to go through the grid, kind of find where it is. Is it a manipulative? Is it a locomotor, non-locomotor skill? Find where it's taught, and then you're going to fill in the specific information that the lesson plan asks for based on the GLEs. So you'll fill that all in. The Show Me Standards is a different document. You'll open that document. On one side, it's going to have Show Me Standards, and it's going to be broken down by different subject areas, and the other with goals. And another side, it's going to be broken down into some big picture things. So what you're going to want to do basically is pick one thing from each side of that Show Me Standards. The one that has content area, you'll have to pick something from health and physical education. So you're going to write down kind of what the concept is. There's a box. You're going to write like the title of the box. You're going to then pick the number and write the number out. And then you're going to explain in a sentence how it applies specifically to your lesson concept. So you'll do that for both sides of that Show Me Standards document. If you don't explain how it applies, or you don't explain it, you didn't do that right. If you don't understand how to do this, make an appointment with me in the office in the next week and come by and see me, and I'll explain how to do it. So in the curriculum information, remember, everybody does the NASB standards, and only the PE teachers need to do the GLEs and Show Me standards. Another important part is equipment, and we worked on budgeting, which is part of our equipment. Another important part, before you ever budget, you inventory your equipment. So when we consider equipment, you need to inventory equipment, make sure you have it way before you design your instruction, because if you don't have the equipment, you don't have the specific number, you can't really design a lesson around things you don't have. And then right before, you need to make sure it's prepared. Are balls aired up, or do you have everything you need to do to put the nets up? Do you know how to do that on the day of? So remember, you're going to be the teacher. So if we have to go to the link, the class period before, you need to go with me to the closet and air up everything that needs aired up and put it in a bag for me to be able to take over that morning, right? If it's going to be if your teaching session is going to be in Jason Gym, you need to do the same thing. We won't have to put it in a bag, but we'll need to have it aired up, make sure everything's there and organized. So now that you know what your lesson plan is, next week, if you need specific equipment, we need to go down in the closet and check to make sure we have it. If not, you're going to have to provide it from somewhere. So you have to make sure you list the quantity, make sure you have the correct quantity for your group. Another thing, you have to ensure that the equipment is safe, all right? You know, if it's damaged, we don't want to use it. If there's strings off, if like bats, helmets, all those different things need to be safe. They need to fit somewhat correctly. And then you need to make sure it's ready and you're able to use it on that day. So it's important to consider the safety of equipment use. First question I have for you to consider, should you demonstrate it before you hand it out? Or do you hand out the equipment and then demonstrate it? All right. So it really depends on what the equipment is and what level of students you have, and kind of what your procedures and routines are and what your trust in your students are. But how are you going to demonstrate it? So you kind of need to figure that out. Are you going to demonstrate it yourself? Are you going to use a video? Are you going to have a student demonstrate it? Are you going to have everybody demonstrate it while you're demonstrating it, kind of like a follow the leader type instruction? That also plays into how you're going to hand it out. So consider how you're going to demonstrate it. Consider all that. If you have to set it up, do you get it out before or after instruction? Do you keep it in a closet? Do you keep it on the side? Do you keep it in a cart? What do you do? All right. So you really have to kind of consider that as well. Like, before you ever provide it to your students, it's important to discuss all the safety concerns before distributing it. So if you're going to have the students handle it before, as you're demonstrating it, you need to do the safety first. All right. So anytime there's something long like a bat or a hockey stick, it becomes a sword or a guitar. Or, anytime there's balls, people are going to throw it or they're going to bounce it. So you have to consider all those different things. Like, if people are going to swing a bat, where's the catcher stand? How do you drop the bat? You know, where's the person on deck going to stand? Like, the pitcher's got to be ready just in case the bat slips out of the batter's hand as well. So you have to consider a lot of those different things. Another big thing is that equipment a distraction? If it is, what is our verbiage? What is our stop signal? Do we have them, set it by their feet, put it between their knees? Do we leave it on the side until the last minute? How do we distribute it? How do we stop it from being a distraction? How do we consider that? How do you distribute it? So there's all kinds of different ways to distribute it. So distributing equipment, the time, is it going to be after instruction? Is it going to be before instruction? Is it going to be a distraction? What's our activity? Do we need it during our instruction? What's our age group of our participants? So we're going to have to consider all this. Do we go with, hey, everybody go over and get one? Sometimes that's quicker. Sometimes it's not. Do we use the team captain method, where a team captain goes and gets 5 and hands them out, or a star student does that? Do you hand it out yourself? There's all kinds of different things. But part of the best practices is if you can place it on the perimeter and have your procedures in that people don't mess with it to be able to do this, so it's close and it's ready, then that's the best idea to do. If it's safe and it's not a distraction, that's the best method. So it limits your transition time. But if we have students that are going to pick it up and mess with it while you're, somewhat supervising the locker room, you can't really use that method. So this assignment is up on Canvas, and this is one that'll be partly on your specific activity and partly on 2 different activities. So take what we just talked about, equipment, what was in the textbook, and anything else you might find online. You might need to do a little research. So you're basically going to number 1, 2, and 3, and then you're going to put A, B, and C under each of the numbers. So you're going to list 3 different pieces of equipment, and they all need to be from 3 different physical activities or youth sports. So you can't use, 3 with basketball or 3 with football. And then on top of that, each of these pieces of equipment needs to be distinctly different. So each piece needs to be from a different game or activity, and they got to be different pieces of equipment. So don't put down a tennis racket, a pickleball paddle, and a badminton racket. Or don't put down, a basketball, a soccer ball. If you use a ball, you can't use another ball. All right. So try to mix up your stuff. The first thing is the number 1 piece of equipment needs to be from your activity. All right. It can be a basketball, a soccer ball, the piece of weight room equipment, a yoga mat, but the first piece of equipment needs to be from your activity that you're going to teach, and the other 2 need to be the distinctly different ones from there. So you're going to list the piece of equipment by the number, and then A, B, and C will be explaining these things about each piece of equipment. A would be consider all the safety concerns for a piece of equipment in a secondary PE class or a secondary aged youth sports team or activity program, uh, strength training program, fitness program, right? So remember, we're kind of considering those 12 to 18-year-olds. For B, then how would you explain the safe use? Be detailed. How would you explain, this is tell, the safe use of the equipment to that same group? Whether it's a PE class, a youth sports team, a fitness, wellness, strength training, dance program. And then C, explain how you would demonstrate the safe use of this piece of equipment. So we're going to A, safety concerns, B, explain, which is tell, and C, demonstrate, which is show the safe use of the equipment. So you have till Thursday to knock this out. And remember, number one needs to be from your activity. And then if you do this right, you'll take that information and that's going to be part of your equipment section on your lesson plan. So we talked about some organization, we talked about equipment. Let's get into the instructional introduction a little bit now. So the instant activity is the first thing your students or participants do when they arrive. So, students might get in the gym, they might get done dressing out, hop in the gym, they might, already be dressed out. This is going to be different based on your space, your facility, your age, what type of class it is, if it's a practice, if it's a PE class. Not everybody gets dropped off at the same time, or you're going to have a pre-practice type routine set up. So some of this is going to be routines, but you might change this up, especially in PE if you're doing different things. Like, if we're in a basketball unit, are we doing basketball, or we just got done with volleyball so they can still work on their volleyball skills. So what are students going to do when they first enter the gym? Some people have music on and they like them to walk or, do different activities. But you don't want to just have them sit there. Remember, we want people to be active. The next thing is sometimes we'll want to do our demonstration and explanation or talk about our performance objective and get things going and then do the warm-up, so we don't do the warm-up and then cool down while we're doing our set induction. So you might flip-flop the order of these. But your warm-up is, first of all, you need to increase the heart rate. So you might walk, you might do some jumping jacks, you might do some things to get the heart rate up. And then you'll consider some static warm-up activities, stretches, flexibility. Static means you're kind of standing still. They're the non-locomotor type activities. Then it's always good to move in some dynamic activities. So this is going to add locomotor. You're going to actually do some stretching or flexibility or things while you're in motion. So like consider like, anytime you're moving, not just standing and stretching anymore, like even your karaoke, your different type of activities like that. And then you always want to consider, even if you have a normal routine, something activity specific. So in your lesson plan, you're going to write these out, and in your lesson, you're only going to teach 2 activity specific warm-ups. So like consider if you're doing something that works on the arms, you need to maybe add in something specific, activity specific. If you think about it for a practice session, like baseball, softball are going to do a lot more arm flexibility and warm-ups to get their arms ready for throwing, where track and field are going to do a lot more things based on the legs. Your set induction, like I said, you might flip-flop the order of these two, but your set induction is how will you initially engage students or participants in the activity or lesson. This could be something like showing a video, asking a question about the new activity, possibly relating it to the last activity you did. If you're in a practice session, it might be, you talked about the game last night. How are you going to do things? So you're trying to build interest or excitement for your activity. Grab their attention. Do you show like, if you're doing a soccer unit, do you show a clip of a pro soccer game? If you're doing a softball unit, do you, show a clip of Team USA's, softball winning a game? How are you going to build that excitement? Then you're going to get into your demonstration and explanation, and sometimes these overlap. Your demonstration is your visual. How are you going to show the parts of the skill for your activity? All right, and we'll get into the 4 parts of the skill here in a little while. But how are you going to show it? Are you going to show all 4 parts? Are you going to break it down? Are you going to do that in a video? Are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to do it yourself and then have some students do it and let them and explain it while they're doing it? Sometimes it's hard for you to bring in the explanation while you're doing the demonstration because it's hard to point things out when you're the demonstrator. Then the explanation is the auditory. That's the tell it. Just show and tell. All right. How will you tell them about it? You might briefly tell them during the demonstration and then maybe break down specific parts. You might have, you know, some kind of visual for them to see if it has different parts. You might do a verbal step-by-step breakdown of your skill or activity. So that's your demonstration explanation. All these things are going to be your instructional introduction. So consider that part of the instructional introduction for your specific skill, and then you can start working on that lesson planning worksheet with that information. So to help us break down that demonstration and explanation, we need to know how people learn movement. And this helps us then sets the framework or foundation for us to build our activities. So think about learning a new physical activity or skill. How did you go about learning a new movement that you've never learned before? So there are 3 common ways that students or athletes learn. First of all, they learn by observing or watching. They want to see it. All right. They want to maybe see a skill. They want to see a play. They want to see something. The next thing is they learn by listening. So they learn by hearing. They need somebody to tell them about it, to explain, the trajectory, the motion, when's the weight transfer happen, where do your eyes go. So these are the first 2, and we just talked about that in the instructional introduction. The next part is after you've done those 2 things, and sometimes you do these in a different order, but generally you're going to observe and listen about it first, and then you're going to do it. You're going to feel the movement. You're going to actually be involved. You're going to be a hands-on learner. That's the kinesthetics. So after people kind of see it, they hear about it, they want to try to do it, see what they can and can't do. Right? So some people will try to get to that pretty quick, especially when you have equipment. So you might have to slow them down to make sure they kind of seen it, heard about it, and then get into trying it. So let's break down our demonstration and explanation a little bit more. So think about your specific skill kind of as we're going through this. How are you going to show it? How are you going to tell it? How are you going to get people to do it? So first of all, the demonstration is to show it. So we want to show the entire skill. We want to go right-handed and left-handed, or right-footed and left-footed if appropriate, and we probably want to use the terminology dominant hand, non-dominant hand, so we're not saying right and left, especially if we have a lefty there. All right? So remember those terms, and then you might even talk about bilateral and bring in your kinesthetic terms here. You'll want to show the skill several times at several angles. All right? And then how are you going to do this? Are you going to do it as a teacher? Are you going to show a video clip? Are you going to have a student? Are you going to have an expert performer? That could be a video or somebody else in person. And then as we're showing it, we want to show the whole thing in real time. And then if we can, we want to maybe break down some parts if it's possible. The 2 that are the easiest to break down when we get into it are the stance, because you're frozen, you haven't done it yet, and then the follow through, because it's the end. The 2 middle phases, they're in motion for the most part, and they're harder to really show and like stop it unless you have a video. The tell it is where you explain about it. And it depends on your performers, but when you first introduce it, you generally want to maybe tell a little bit about all 4 phases, but you want to explain really 1 or 2 skill elements in detail at a time. So you might explain the stance, and then everybody show me the stance. And then you might want to explain the follow through. Everybody show me how you should be on the follow through. And then you might want to drill those 2 in like a shadow format without any equipment before you get into really trying to teach the middle section or the skill elements. So teachers shouldn't explain every part of the skill during the demonstration. Students can or won't remember it all, and you get standing around and people get anxious, and there's too much. So you have to focus on a couple things. You'll use what's called the funnel format. You'll start kind of broad with the basics and then start moving down to some narrower, more critical kinesthetic components. right? Do like, when does this weight transfer occur and things like that. And then the feel it part's the kinesthetics, right? That's when students actually get to attempt the motion or movement. Do we want to start with out objects, no ball? We're doing a shadow thing. You know, they used to call that shadow boxing. You're boxing with nobody, but like we'd call it shadow drills when I did it. Like you didn't have any equipment. You were just trying the different parts of the movement. Then if it's something that they can do at a slower speed, you want to do that first. Some things you can't really do. They're kind of more speed reliant. You might want to shorten the distance. You might want to do it with lighter objects, right? So you want to kind of just let students attempt or feel the movement and try to learn the skill, and then add in those different variables as you go. And like I said, we just want to work with no variables. We're working on the form of the movement. There's no defense. Like, for example, like if you're catching a ball, like if I throw the ball, I want to throw it right to your glove, and then you want to start throwing the ball where they have to move the glove around, where their heel of their hand's still down, but they're moving the glove around. And then the harder part is getting people to learn to flip over the glove when the ball's kind of below their waist and catch it now with their fingers down. And then you got to teach moving, like moving to go get it. So that's adding in the different variables. And then after that, you'll even teach like, okay, I got to position myself to catch it, to throw it to the base I want to throw it to. So there's all kinds of more variables you can add on just catching the ball. So how do we develop our content? So all these, like you see, are going to be on the lesson plan in some different areas. So in content development, you're going to inform your participants or students. That's the teaching part. So it's how you teach those critical components of the skill or activity. If it's a movement pattern, which most of us are going to be working on a movement or movement pattern, we're going to detail those 4 phases, and I introduced them at the end of the last lesson. It's the stance, the execution, it's the stance, the preparatory phase, the action or execution phase, and then the follow through. So you're going to have to consider those 4 phases and detail them, starting usually, you generally start with the 2 outside ones because they're the ones that you can freeze in time, the starting and ending, and then you teach the middle 2 next. If it's an activity or build-up game, or even a game, you're going to want to inform people of the rules or instructions, or the scoring system or specific rules of this build-up game, or what the goals are. So you have to provide that information. So that goes back to your demonstration, your explanation, and now like we're informing how we're going to do it within our activities. So next is, how are you going to continue to inform during the teaching or instructional process while people are learning those critical components of the skill? So for us, this time we're detailing the 4 phases of movement. When you do your instructional video later, it's going to be based more on an activity or bigger picture thing. But consider your teaching cues. Teaching cues are what you basically say, your coaching points, while you're teaching the activity. Think about what a coach repeatedly says to you when you were doing a skill. Elbow in, follow through, knees under the ball, transfer your weight, keep your head on the ball, eyes on the target. Those are your coaching points. So the things that like people think are the most important part of the skill that coaches need to continue to reinforce. Sometimes they use an acronym like we used in teaching basketball shooting was BEEF. You wanted to have balance, you wanted to have your eyes on the target, you wanted to have your elbow under the ball, and you wanted to follow through. So we talked about that being BEEF, the first letter of each of those words. Or you might use short, catchy words or phrases. Block out, follow through, get back. Like when you were talking about different things. Eyes on target, head high. Like so, you might have short, different things that uses your teaching cues. So those are the things you're going to say, and you need to make sure that your participants understand what you're saying and what their action is supposed to be, because sometimes they don't. So take your skill and start thinking about this as I go through it. And I even have a graphic here kind of giving a little bit of this. But when we teach any basic movement skill, there's 4 general phases. And we start off with the stance. The stance is the non-locomotor part of movement. It's the general athletic stance for most things starts with kind of feet shoulder width apart, knees slightly bent. You know, your hands are out to the side, your head is slightly forward, you're bent at the waist a little bit, kind of a little bit of a crouch position. And then if you think about that, like a lot of things come from that. A defensive stance, you shoot from there, you put a bat in your hand, like you're going to start changing a little bit here or there. You block from that, like in football, like a lot of things will then kind of change off of that, but that's kind of your general athletic stance. So you kind of teach that, and then you talk about your body positioning, like how you change from your kind of general athletic stance. So when you explain the stance, you want to start like, where's your head? Your eyes are where? Go down, like explain shoulders. If it's something you're going to be doing with your hands and arms, is there a specific positioning with your hands and arms? Use your kinesthetic terms. Go down, like talk about your waist. If hips are different, if you have a dominant foot or dominant hand, one place in front of the other, what do your knees look like? What do your toes look like? Are they pointing towards whatever? You need to explain all that and be detailed in your stance when you're explaining it in your activity. But you need to be able to do that to your participants. If you have any type of object, if it's a manipulative type of skill, you might include a grip. All right, are you gripping a bat? Are you gripping a racket? Do you shake hands with the racket to get it? How do you hold the bat? Like, are you gripping a ball, or do you got your fingers spread? Are you gripping a golf club? Are you doing the interlock type position? Are you, how are you handling, strength training, different equipment? So if there's a grip, you need to include that in the stance. And does it come before you get in the stance, or as like kind of after you're in the stance, and then include it there when you're explaining it. The next phase is your preparatory phase. So this is where you're going to kind of prepare to start your motion. So if you transfer your weight, think about batting. If you're in the batter's box, you're going to slightly transfer your weight back on your dominant foot if you're batting dominant hand style. Transfer your weight back. You're going to cock the bat. You're going to bring your top knee is going to, your top front leg, your non-dominant leg is going to straighten out slightly. You're going to bring your eyes into the target and really focus. All right. What are you going to do with different things? Do you cock a bat? Do you cock a racket? Do you toss the ball for a volleyball serve? Do you get your hands in a certain position? Do you bend your knees more? Do you start transferring your weight? Is one leg different than the other? If you see in our graphic over to the right, like there's a lead leg and the drive leg, and they look different. There's top arm and bottom arm, like they look different. So how are you going to explain all those things? Because you need to explain these. It can't be too simple. It's got to be broken down, and you need to use some specific and as anatomically correct terms as you can. The next phase is the action phase. All right, so let's label these correctly when you're teaching them and making them for your lesson plan. Stance, preparatory phase, action phase. The action phase is where the skill gets executed. All right. Do you transfer your weight? Do you explode off of the floor? Do you hit, make contact, or even release an object? All right. So it's basically you move from the preparatory phase, and within a fraction of a second, you're actually executing the skill. So you need to, like, once again, then detail what all happens. What do the heads do? What are shoulders, arms, hands? If you're doing an object, what's it look like? Where's the waist? Do the hips turn now towards somewhere? Do our lead leg or drive leg do something different? Like, where do our toes go towards? And that's not getting to the follow through. That's during the action. The follow through is going to be the last phase. And then it's right after the action, and it's something we do to try to make the action correct. You might flick the wrist. You might do something to get backspin. You might do something to ensure that your throw is on target or your kick is on target. Do you flick the wrist? Do you swivel your hips? Do you keep your eyes on the target? Do you keep your head down? How should your hands end? Like, if you're bumping a volleyball, you don't want to go straight up to the ceiling or the ball will. Like, remember your action. So you need to explain that follow through. So I introduced teaching cues, but let me dig into teaching cues a little bit more. So teaching cues are how you provide the instruction based on your 4 phases of movement, right? And you're going to use these then within your activities, and we'll get into the activities in our next lesson next week. So you use the teaching cues to provide students with meaningful and relevant ways to remember a technique. Cues help reduce wordings because you're going to be doing things like real quick. Uh, you're going to provide this explanation before you go into things and give them, a lot of different things in your explanation and demonstration. But teaching cues give students a reduced word, like maybe 1, 2, 3 quick words, help students focus on what to do correct, what to look at, and allow teachers a way to provide some on-the-spot, quick, meaningful feedback. Remember, they could be short, catchy, descriptive words or phrases. They help with that retention and performance. They could be acronyms, and they're the things you're going to be saying repeatedly to try to help people improve performance or make sure they're doing the correct part of the skill. Why are they important? Well, to help people, to motivate people, and to help people understand their own movement, we need to provide the whys. Some students learn better when they understand why they're doing something or why it's done a certain way. So we need to kind of explain. It helps people understand it, understand when to use it. It reinforces it. It helps them even understand their own movement to be able to then apply the skill and then self-correct later when they get good at the skill and understanding it. And then you need to check for understanding. So in your teaching cues, you shouldn't really use, are there any questions? Do y'all get it? I know I do that sometimes, but that's not that effective. Be specific. Like, hey, show me how to do the stance. Tell me what the head does in the execution phase. Explain to me why the follow through is important. Right? So shadowing, mirroring, students repeat the teacher's action. You might like tell them something and then have them repeat it. I call that echo learning. That's vocal responding or echoing. Students recite what they're supposed to do. Right? So in the stance, what am I supposed to do? And like you might have your teaching cues and you have them re-say it. Reiterate the students' things. Like, so if you teach one person, you're giving them feedback, make sure you reiterate it to the whole group and then the whole class, especially if several people seem to be doing the same thing. All right? And then remember our fist of 5 technique and some of those different techniques. That checking for understanding, that's formative assessment. We'll talk more about that in our assessment section. So here's your second assignment for this segment of Module 5. And it'll be due Saturday, so you'll have another day or two. And I told you last week that this was coming. So do some research on the 4 phases of movement of your specific motor skill. So aspiring professionals will investigate a motor skill or movement pattern, and that's the one that's your topic for your lesson, to characterize the 4 phases of movement by illustrating each phase to provide appropriate anatomic and kinesthetic terms. So number 1, list your specific lesson concept. And then number 2, 3, 4, and 5 are going to be breaking down the different phases. So you're going to fully describe the stance phase. And you'll include the grip if there's a grip. And this is, like I explained previously, you need to explain where the head and eyes are, if the chin tucks, what the shoulders do, what arms do, if different arms do different things, if there's a lead arm, a trail arm, a lead leg, a trail leg. Go all the way down the body in the stance phase, or knees bent, 90-degree angle, or the hips pointing towards a specific object. What are the toes? What are the knees like? And then go to the preparatory phase. Explain that all the way from head to toe. Go to your action phase, explain that head to toe, and then go to your follow-through phase, explain that head to toe. Use appropriate anatomic and kinesthetic terms. All right. So you're going to need to do some research on this. You might want to watch some videos. You might want to, like, don't copy me something from the internet. Don't AI this, or don't, copy and paste something. Study through this to make sure you understand it and write it out the way you would understand it. So post this to Canvas by Saturday. So here is a review or summary of today's learning. So what are our non-instructional tasks? Remember, those are things like our stop signal, our teacher positioning, how we use formations, the organization of our instruction, how we even consider our scope and sequence, how we group students, get them into groups, how we transition even between activities once we get to that, like how we move from our first learning activity to our second activity, how we then even handle some equipment type of things. So what do we need to consider about equipment? Well, if we consider it, we have to inventory it even before we start with our activity. Probably when we're building our curriculum or we're building our activity, need to have time to order things. Can't do an activity that needs certain equipment if we don't have it. We have to prepare our equipment a day or two in advance. We have to consider the safety and how we're going to explain the safety to our students. And then like the safety is a consideration on how we do distribution. All right. We're going to need to consider our distribution method, and that's going to have a lot of variables. How are we going to demonstrate it? How are we going to collect it at the end? Oh, we didn't even talk about that. Like, you're going to have everybody bring it in. Like, you don't want in between activities balls to be rolling around, somebody step on. So like, you need to have some kind of command to put equipment where it goes. And then if it's a distraction, how could we limit the distractions? And then we also have to consider any modifications, and we'll talk more about those in our adaptive lesson. What are the 5 parts of the instructional introduction on the lesson plan? We went over those, so you need to go make sure you're building those based on today's lesson, the instant activity, the warm-up, the set induction, the demonstration, and the explanation. And your demonstration and explanation really need to focus in on your second assignment today, which is your 4 phases of movement. What are the 3 common ways people learn? Do you remember? Watching or observing, people are visual learners. Listening or hearing, people are auditory learners. And then by movement or hands-on learning, people are kinesthetic learners. What are the 4 phases of movement in order? The stance, including a grip if necessary. Part 2 is the preparatory phase. Part 3 is the action phase. And part 4 is the follow-through. Right, so if you haven't yet, you need to go back and do these 1, 2, and 3, the grayed out areas. I know some of you don't have your observation worksheet number 1 completed. With the weather, it might be tough to do the next couple days, but you need to get on that. You need to be proactive in your scheduling. You'll have, another week or so until your observation worksheet number 2 is due. Make sure you look at your feedback for your 3-part performance objective assignment and essential question, and update that, and go ahead and add it to your lesson planning worksheet once you update it. And today's assignments that we'll do over the next few days are your equipment safety assignment that's due Thursday, and your 4 phases of movement assignment that's due Saturday. After next Tuesday's lesson, we will take a quiz, and then you're going to have an observation worksheet again due on Friday, February 28th. So make sure you're getting that done. I would update your course portfolio, look at your observation log to see how far you're coming along, because those are going to be due the end of the first week of March, right before spring break. All right, so remember, we have an observation day on Thursday, February 20th, which means there's no in-class meeting. You have time to do research for your 4 phases of movement. If your observation site's open, you should do an observation. If not, make sure you're doing your reading assignments for this module, and you're catching up to check your grade book, check your feedback, make sure you're doing research on your lesson topic to be prepared to write an effective lesson plan. All right, hopefully you enjoyed this virtual presentation. Be safe, and we will see you next Tuesday.